I'm here with Suzie Simpson. It's October 31st, 2006, at shortly after 6:30 p.m. We're at my home at 515 City Park. Would you state your name, please?
Yes, Suzie Simpson.
And what is your date of birth?
9/12/49.
And what is your ethnic or racial background?
Caucasian.
All right. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in southeastern Ohio.
All right. What county would have that been?
Harrison.
Okay. And what is your earliest memory?
I can tell you where I grew up was very small. There were 32 in my graduating class. And my parents had a little grocery store, gas station, restaurant combo in the house. And as far as the whole gay thing, that was something no one ever talked about. Then I can remember hearing the word dyke a couple of times, but it was not said in a good way, and nobody said what it really meant even.
How old would have you been when you first remember hearing a term like that?
Probably junior high or high school even.
And were they referring to somebody in particular?
Yeah. It was like, isn't she a dyke? Oh, no, I don't think so. But we were never told what that even meant. I mean, it was a very old-fashioned, kind of country.
Were there any gay people in the community where you lived, or people rumored to be gay?
There were rumors that that a male teacher was. That was never ever substantiated as far as I know.
Where did you go to school at? Grade school, elementary school, high school, that sort of thing?
It was Piedmont, Moorfield, and Freeport grade schools, and Lakeland High School.
All right. When you were in school before you graduated, who were your heroes? Do you remember people that you looked up to or you thought were pretty cool?
I thought Billie Jean King was pretty cool. I thought some of my teachers were pretty cool. I remember having crushes on women, but I didn't know what they meant or what that was all about.
How old were you when you first realized that you might be different than some of the other kids?
Well, I always knew I was different. I just didn't know
how
or in what way.
How was it that you knew that you were different? What was it that informed you of that?
I just felt like it. I didn't feel like I belonged there. There was something different. I knew I had to get out into the, quote, real world to find out what was going on.
Did you get the sense that other people realized you were different too, or was it just something that you realized?
I don't think it even crossed my mind whether other people did or not.
When you were in school, did you feel like you fit in with the others?
Yeah.
When you were in school, did anyone ever accuse you of being different or suggest that you might be?
No.
No. All right. You said that you always kind of felt like you were different. When was it that you figured out that meant that you were sexually attracted to women instead of men?
Well, I didn't act on it until I got to college and got exposed to it there. I always felt these feelings or crushes or I wanted to spend time or be around certain women when I was growing up. But I didn't know what it was all about or what it meant. But I wasn't having those feelings about men.
Did that seem normal to you at the time?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever talk with anyone about it?
No.
Friends or family members or anything?
No, my parents were very, didn't talk about sex in any way, shape, or form.
What year did you graduate from high school then?
1967.
Okay, and at that point, did you immediately start college?
I had to go to the branch for a year, and then I finally got so upset and just begged my parents to send me to campus. So,
all right. When you
say
branch, you mean
it was a branch of Ohio University, about an hour from where we lived.
All right. When you were attending the branch, did you meet other people who were gay?
No.
Did you have crushes on people and feel attraction to women while you were there?
I don't remember a whole lot about the branch, except, because we basically drove there, went to the classes, and drove back home. And there really wasn't much opportunity or times where there was socializing because it was too far away to get together after.
All right. While you were at the branch and prior to that, when you were in school, did you date boys?
Some. It was more kind of friends that I was going out with than romantic dates.
Some people have told me that, some people who are gay have told me that when they dated people in high school, later they realized the people that they dated were gay too. Did you have any of those experiences?
In fact, I have not tracked him down to this day, but one of the guys that I dated a little bit and was good friends with, when I think back now, it has to be.
All right. So 1968, somewhere around in there, you then went to OU?
Ohio University.
All right. Tell me what happened there.
Well, that was the beginning of the drug, sex, and rock and roll period. And the anti-war movement was, well, I guess it was a little bit before that, but I kind of got involved in that. I think I was like a lost soul, just kind of searching for something, and I didn't know what. And I did get involved in a lot of the political stuff that was going on. I ended up dropping out after 2 years and moving to Columbus.
What were you studying when you were at OU?
Oh, I was studying theater, art. Everybody told me I should be a teacher, so I was kind of in that. But then I would take a class, and I thought it was really cool, so I would decide, well, that's what I want to major or minor in. I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I just wanted to learn things and experience life because I felt like I'd been very sheltered growing up where I did, and I knew there was more going on. And I guess I was just kind of thirsting to find all that.
In the 2 years that you were at OU in Athens, did you meet other gay people then?
There was one of our student body presidents that we found out was gay, but nobody talked about it. There were 7 of us that got a house together, and she had lived there. And
7 women?
Yeah. And they weren't all gay. But she was, and, but nobody talked about it. And when our friend would come over, they would go upstairs or whatever, still nobody would talk about it. It was still very under the table. It wasn't until I came to Columbus and at Ohio State that finally came out in the open.
All right. Well, let's talk about that. What year did you come to Ohio State?
So that would have been 69 or 70. It was before the 70. Yeah, because I was here during the 70 riots.
All right. What was campus like when you came here to go to school?
It was, well, that's when the hippie and the anti-war movement was going on, which I was involved in. And actually a friend of mine asked me to go to a women's liberation meeting that she had promised this woman in one of her classes she would come. She didn't want to go alone. And I was like, all right, I'll go. And I did, and this woman was there that was in one of my other classes, and we became immediate friends. And to me, when I think back on that period and the whole thing, I think because of the anti-war movement and the women that were involved in it, that's where the women's liberation kind of birthed out of, because the men were still treating the women in the organizations like crap. And then out of the women's organizations came the lesbian movements and groups, and that were very street-oriented and political as a takeoff on the anti-war movement. When Stonewall got started here, at the same time, there were a lot of lesbian groups that were always changing their name, but they were doing things like walking down the street holding hands and, doing in-your-face kind of stuff. And there was kind of a class difference in that Stonewall was perceived as something that you had to have money to belong to, or it was a different class of people that started it, as opposed to these radicals. But that was also a time where every organization and movement thought that what they were doing was the way to change the world and make it a better place, and hence we all ended up fighting each other and not getting as far as we could because we were fighting each other instead of, agreeing to the fact that, we're all doing different things, but they all count and they all matter, and they're all helping to make the world a better place.
Do you remember the names of any of the anti-war groups or organizations that were on the OSU campus?
The Indochina Peace campaign was one of the earlier ones. And Jane Fonda came and spoke. Holly Near was a big peace activist back then, who came to Columbus several times.
And the Indochina Peace campaign, was this something that gay people were involved in?
Yeah. But it was they were all kind of one. It was like the National Organization for Women kind of sprung up then too, but so what happened was the lesbians were out there fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment and for abortion rights and all this stuff, but then now didn't want to recognize lesbians as, because back then it was all the housewives who hadn't come out and they were too afraid. They didn't want to be seen as a gay organization, but it was all the lesbians doing all the work to make things happen, and a lot of times things that weren't going to really affect them. And there was a huge conference at the fairgrounds that I think now, it must have been the Now conference. But there were huge fights where, I can remember, women getting up on chairs and yelling and screaming at each other between the lesbians and the straight women, and why won't you recognize us?
And would have this been just Columbus Now, or was this like National Now meeting in Columbus?
I think it was a national conference, but the clashes were happening here. Now, I assume were happening in a lot of other cities too, and Now is perfectly fine with the whole gay and lesbian thing now. But back then, I think it was just their fear, and nobody would look up to them as a viable organization if people knew there were lesbians in it.
This conference that was at the fairgrounds, was this something that happened in the 70s?
Yeah.
Is that your recollection?
Yeah.
How many people? Was it like a couple of hundred people? Or
there were, I would say, 500 or less.
So a sizable group. Do you remember any other groups on campus that women or gay men were involved with at that time?
There was let's see, I can't remember what they were called. Because they kept changing their name. Now we had the Gay Women Sophoncified at one point. And,
I'm sorry, Gay Women's what?
Sophoncified.
Like from Sappho's? Okay. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm... What was the reason for Sophoncified? Was there a...
Because it was a bunch of women sitting around trying to think of some creative name that would have this heavy meaning.
Okay. Who were the people that were involved with that? Do you recall?
As far as names?
Yeah.
There was Susan Dyer, Lisa.
And were these people students at OSU or employees or students?
Mostly students at that point.
At that time, what was Gay Women Sophoncified? What was their focus? What were they trying to do with the organization?
It was more, and there again, when the group started, they were, by whatever name we ended up picking, we would have meetings regularly and then decide what kind of things we wanted to do. And there was a lot of political focus, a lot of, how are we going to be accepted in the world? How can we, be accepting of each other too? There was also the Women's Liberation group where women would get together and meet and talk and try and work things out. We actually had a group. I didn't live there, but there were about 6 women who got a house on Price Avenue way back then, and called Flytown then. Still, it was a scary part of town. And Linda Apple actually opened an art gallery on High Street where we would have the Women's Music Union also formed around that time, mid-70s. And we would also have variety shows in there. And it was like a little haven that, nobody in the neighborhood knew what was going on. The Women's Music Union started because, believe it or not, no places would let women play. The bars wouldn't, you might find a coffee house here or there, but for the most part, women weren't accepted as viable performers. So a bunch of women in Columbus who were performers got together and, said, well, let's form a group, and our focus was going to be, let's, find places for us to play or create our own places. That, interestingly enough, kind of happened the same time that the national lesbian music circuit was getting started. And somebody goes, hey, so-and-so is coming through town, do we want to do a show with them? And so that's how we got started. And we were actually one of the first and longest running women's production companies in the country. We did Meg Christian and Holly Near and Jude Millington and all the old timers who were coming through.
So when was this Women's Music Union first organized?
It was the early to mid-70s.
And the focus of the group was both in promoting women's music and creating venues for women to express their musical talents, either local women or people who might be touring.
And we ended up mostly doing touring women because it just kind of took over. And
Sure.
But what we would do would be, find a church or a coffee house space or somewhere that would let us have a concert. And back then, it didn't matter who it was, because the women would come to see anyone just because it was a time to get together and gather with other women, and just the whole energy of it was new and different. And so it didn't really matter who it was that you were having. And it was a very word of mouth. You would hang flyers up. People would call each other on the phone.
Where were some of the places that these events happened at?
We did a lot of them at Summit United Methodist Church on 16th and Waldeck. They were very supportive of progressive groups. We did some on campus. We would rent Hughes Hall, the old music building. We had some stuff at Apple's studio gallery. We did an annual variety show there every year. Community progressive people back then started the Moonshine Co-op, I think is what it was called, on 11th and North 4th. And we played there a few times.
How many people would, on average, attend one of these women's music union programs?
We would get 100 to 400 easily.
And would this just be women here in Columbus, or would people come?
Some were women in Columbus, and some were women who would follow, if they decided Chris Williamson was their favorite performer and they happened to see him in Michigan, they would follow him to where they were playing in Columbus and Indiana or vice versa. But for the most part, it was local women that came.
It was interesting to me, you mentioned a moment ago, the genesis of the Women's Music Union was that it was difficult for women to find a place to be able to play music. That never occurred to me that was an issue that women were facing. And I was wondering if you could help me understand maybe some of the other issues that women were facing at that time. There were things they were prohibited from doing or expectations that society placed on them as far as how to behave or what's the appropriate role or whatever.
Then it was like, if you were in college, you weren't really there for an education. You were there to find someone to get married to that would have a good career and you could settle down and make money. Women were really not accepted in very many professions, except teaching and nursing were two that women were expected to go into. To me, I think it was a very exciting time to be part of that and feel the energy of women coming together and finding their strength. And, a lot of people will say, why did you have to have women's only events and so forth? And back then they were really needed because, one, we didn't have a lot of confidence in ourselves as beings that were able to do a lot of things. And it kind of gave you an energy that you just felt when you walked in, no matter what, that, here was this energy that existed, all these women coming together for this concert or meetings or, whatever event you were having. I do feel like we've evolved beyond that now, and that's, I don't know, to me that's something that's there's still that energy when you're at an all-women's thing, but I don't think the necessity for it is there like it was back then. Obviously, a lot of things have changed now, and we're a lot more mainstream in many more ways than we were back then. But I think it was a very necessary thing to gain our strength and confidence and power to go out into the world and fight for women to be able to do what you wanted to do in life.
Were the Women's Music Union events women-only events?
Most of them were.
And how was that enforced? Was it a part of the advertising or?
Yeah, and people pretty much knew. Some stuff we didn't, and there were some men that came to our stuff that really liked the music or the musicians that we would have. But we never really had any problems because, men could care less about it, really. Now, I do remember some violence at Ohio State when Sue Bassbinder that I mentioned, she was the first openly gay person to run for undergraduate student government president. That was in 72. And she didn't win, but they got 20% of the votes, which I think was pretty amazing for 1972. And the winner, two people that won, got 30% of the votes. So I think, that was a very amazing thing that happened because she was totally out. But she did receive phone calls and people would play Roberta Flack's I Think I'm Going Out of My Head and hang up. Somebody threw a brick through her apartment window. And she got, some death threats and stuff like that on the phone because people knew her name and could find her phone number and as that. But as far as in-your-face violence, I really didn't see a whole lot of that happening. Even when we would walk down the streets holding hands to, see what people, they might yell some things and stuff, but they didn't physically come and try to beat us up.
During your time at Ohio State, when you were involved with some of these different women's groups and so forth, what you mentioned like protesting by walking down the street holding hands or whatever. What sorts of protests or other events public events or kinds of things did these groups hold or sponsor?
There weren't a lot of public events because, like I said, the women then were also involved in the NOW organization, the Women's Liberation Movement, the anti-war groups. We did start a lot of community organizations that we started, what led to the Women Against Rape organization. We started...
What was the initial, do you remember what the first name of that group was?
It might have been Women Against Rape. We started an auto mechanics thing to help teach women how to work on their cars. We started a health group for women to learn about their bodies. And there again, all these groups, a lot of them were started by the same women. So we had meetings every night for something or other. So some of them evolved into other things as more women, came along and kept them going, and others dissolved that, didn't have the support to keep them going and evolve them past the idea. There was a women's action collective that started. It was kind of an umbrella for a lot of these different groups. There was Fan the Flames bookstore that was started back then.
Where was that at?
They were in Clintonville, I believe. I can't remember if it was High Street. They ran it out of a house for a while and then finally got a space. I can't remember when they finally did close. It was after all the big stores came along and they really couldn't compete anymore.
Who was behind the bookstore? Was it like a business or was it like a nonprofit or?
It was a collective that started it. I can't remember who actually was behind it as far as names, and it kind of changed over the years. So I think it was a collective that ended up being a business. Kept it going.
The Women's Music Union, you were one of the organizers in that, is that correct?
Yeah.
Who were the other people that were involved in that?
Let's see, Linda Apple, Margot Ellis, Betsy Cahill. It was one of those organizations that was all volunteer. So sometimes, some years, we might have 10 members. There was one year where there were like a couple of us that kept it going, and then others came in, and because a lot of people thought it was all fun and glory, and they didn't realize it was a lot of hard work. But it did exist for about 10 years.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about, you said, was it Sue Vassbinder?
Yeah.
That ran for USG president in 1972. At that time, I mean, when somebody was running for USG president, did they have a platform? Did they say what they were going to do on campus to make things better, or what their agenda was as president of undergraduate student government?
Yeah, but they did, because that was a very volatile time on campuses, and people were very motivated by the war and the women's movement and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Was it a part of her public persona campaigning that she was gay, or was it just a known fact that she didn't seek out to publicize?
No, I believe it was part of her platform that to have gay rights be accessible and available.
You mentioned, when you were talking about different venues for the Women's Music Union, you mentioned something called the Moonshine Co-op.
Mm-hmm.
What was that?
It was a bar, but it was started by some left community folks from the anti-war movement, the Free Press. But there again, they weren't just letting the women performers play in there very often. They let my group play because they liked us, and we were a little livelier group than some of the folk singers. But even them, who were supposed to be progressive, weren't really that open to very many women performing there.
Since you mentioned it, why don't you tell me about your group?
We were Lotta Crabtree, and we took old mountain and Appalachian songs and changed the lyrics to be women and or gay oriented. The one member was very talented and could play any instrument, could yodel, had a great voice, and she was kind of the lead singer and performer in the group. We also developed what we called non-traditional square dances, where you didn't really have a partner, you had a family. So instead of having the typical 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, we had 3, 3, 3, 3, and we developed different calls and stuff to do square dances. So we actually played at the first and second Michigan Women's Festival. I think it rained. I think the one year nobody played for the whole day because it rained. But I remember that was so cool because we would do a set of our music, and then we would do the square dances, and to look out from the stage and see all these women square dancing in these non-traditional calls and stuff was really pretty neat.
The group, was it all made up of Columbus people then?
Yeah, there was 3 of us, and we mostly played around Columbus. We did play in Michigan and Cleveland and at the Michigan Festival and the National Women's Music Festival. We played halftime at a basketball game, believe it or not. We played...
And what were the instruments?
Guitar, banjo, mandolin, hand drum, spoons.
And what was your role?
I did the hand drums and spoons and some mandolin. But I soon discovered I was not a performer. I was a behind-the-scenes organizer. I'm someone who likes to set up concerts, not be on stage.
Okay, so you're at Ohio State. Once you got to Ohio State, what were you studying there?
I still kept the education thing, but I was in theater, speech, and psychology, I believe.
All right. How long was it that you were at Ohio State before you started exploring your romantic persona?
Oh, that was the first year.
And was it through these groups that you met other women? Is that how that came about? Who was the first person that you told, I'm a lesbian?
I think my friend Sonny Graff. We kind of both decided we were at the same time. But it was one of those where we really weren't meant to be lovers. We were best friends and buddies, and that was really where our strength was, not in being lovers. So we kind of went through a lot of things together through our friendship.
So because she was feeling as if she was gay as well, she had a positive reaction to you confiding in her?
Yes.
All right. Did you tell other people right away? Were there other people that you shared that information with?
Yeah, there was our group of friends that we hung out with, and they all knew it, before I did, and they teased me about it, and just evolved and happened. I didn't, tell my parents for a long time.
Why don't you tell me about that?
We used to get in big arguments just because of my, quote, radical beliefs on the war and everything else. So when I'd get home, we would get in arguments about all that stuff. And I wanted to tell them, but I was afraid because they came from such a small town that they would be embarrassed, or they would have to face their friends, that they really had no clue as to what it even was or meant. And my sister sent me a letter one time that she goes, I know this is none of my business, but your older sister told me when you were dirt under her feet, and because my older sister had lived in Columbus, and she knew. And she said, my younger sister, and the letter said, when I was home, after you left, Mom started crying and said that she thought you were homosexual because you had 2 earrings in one ear, and she'd seen that on TV. She said, I assured her that, I didn't think so, but, and my sister went on to say, I just want you to know, when your older sister told me, I was kind of freaked out, but I talked to people and read some stuff and decided, you're my sister and I love you no matter what. She goes, but for me to give you some advice, I wish you wouldn't tell them because I don't think they could understand it. So I didn't for a long time. And then as, TV started having gay characters on and it became more visible, and we kind of all just came out with it at the same time. They realized it, and but by then they were fine because, they loved me no matter what. We'd gotten past all the arguments and the other stuff, and I was a good daughter by then.
When you came to Columbus and were living in Ohio State, where did gay people meet each other?
Jack's a Go-Go.
Jack's a Go-Go?
Yep. Which was on Summit and just north of Lane. And it was owned by Cleta and her husband, who were straight, but why they decided to have a women's bar, but it was, and that's where everyone went, no matter how old you were, and they didn't check IDs then, and it was kind of a place you could go where you could meet other gay women. And there was a bartender, P.D. Brown, that worked there, who ended up buying it probably 10 years later, changed the name to Summit Station, but everyone still called it Jack's. And it was one of those things that, for all the years, that everyone called it Jack's, no matter what. And just last year, the year before, she sold it to a gay man. So it's no longer the same type of space it was for all those years. It was one of the oldest lesbian bars in the country, from what I've been told. Now, there were some other bars. The Kismet, which is where the Eagle is now, was the dance bar. Women were allowed to go there. Herbie's and the Garage kind of did this thing back and forth for years where women were allowed to go and then you weren't. They didn't want you there, or you had to have a skirt on if they would let you in. So that was kind of a back and forth where, yeah, you were welcome and no, you weren't. And I think when Alice opened the Grapevine, it kind of brought the men and women together. Finally, there was a bar that existed where they could actually talk and find out they liked each other and develop friendships and stuff that kind of hadn't existed because the women were being separatists. The gay men were too because they wanted, so when they did get together in the dance clubs, there was no talking or getting to know each other. It was just, a lot of drinking and drugs and dancing.
This Jack's, when you said it was your understanding had been there for a long time. Mm-hmm. When do you have any idea as to when it's
it was the 69, 70, I would say. I remember going there, well, probably before that, because I remember going there in 69 or 70, and it had existed before that. So I would say late 60s, probably.
All right. And do you remember the first time you went there?
I do.
Well, why don't you tell me about that? How was it first? How was it that you ended up going there?
Some friends said, hey, let's go to this bar. And I was like, okay. And at that time, I had dropped out of school again. I was working for a motorist insurance company. And I walked in, and the woman at the door was someone who worked at Motorist that was checking the ID. Well, they didn't take IDs. She had taken the money at the door. So that was kind of like, we kind of looked at each other and was like, oh, okay. Yeah. But then we found out there were several other women that worked there, and I kind of extended my radicalism there too because they treated us like high school kids, so I was kind of the instigator of getting some things going and stuff there. But Jack's was, there was some neighborhood men that would try and come in then. There were several fights that occurred that men would come in to see the lesbians or want to try and take them home or beat them up. So there were some pool sticks flying and fists flying a few times.
What was the inside of the bar like?
It doesn't look much different now than it did then. It was, a long bar area on one side with stools and a pool table, and there were a jukebox, tables and chairs, and then in the early 80s they built a stage. They started a annual Christmas show, quit like 2 or 3 years ago. So it happened for like 25 years. Every year at Christmas time they would do a Christmas variety show with crazy Saturday Night Live type skits and dancing and drag or whatever kind of stuff. And it was all to raise money for Children's AIDS group at Children's Hospital. So they were major funders of that and their annual Christmas party every year.
Were there any other women-only bars besides Jack's in the early days?
No, that was the only one.
Were there? We talked some about some of the organizations that in the groups that organized on the OSU campus. Were there any other women's organizations or groups for gay women that we haven't talked about already as a way that gay women would meet each other?
They all kind of centered around the women that went to school. Some of them were more community oriented, but they were started by women that were students. There was a great history of when you graduated or didn't graduate, you stayed in Columbus, and a lot of people would leave and they would come back because they realized it was really a great city to live in and easy to meet people and know people, and that there was a lot of good things going on here. So I guess I shouldn't say they were all students either. They had been.
Tell me, you mentioned that you worked at Motorists for a time. Tell me about some of the places that you worked at in Columbus.
Whatever kind of job I could get that would pay the bills, because my focus was on having time to do organizing and music and all these other groups. That was what I wanted to do in life, so I didn't care about a career or whatever. So I just basically jumped from one job to the other. I worked at Motorists.
And what was it that you did there?
I was a clerk.
Were you out while you were there?
I think before I quit, I was seen as a radical there. They would like ring the bell and tell you when you could have a snack and not, and I don't know, that just really irritated me. So I basically organized all the mostly women that were the other clerks there to fight for our rights. And I remember they had a bulletin board and they had put up something about the anti-war people being scum or all this other stuff. So I brought in some other article that stuck it up there, and I remember they got really mad and tore it down. And but I didn't care then because it wasn't a job I cared whether I had or not, and a lot of the women there did. So I guess I felt like I was fighting for them more than anything. I did some phone jobs where you did phone solicitation to sell stuff, or answered phones for different groups. I worked at a daycare center for a while. Early 80s, a friend and I did a hot dog cart. And that was fun because I could work 4 hours a day and make a lot of money and have the rest of my time free. Actually, when they folded, this other guy and I both wanted to start the business, so we did everything, and then the university decided they would buy their own carts and run it out of one of their cafeterias because there was good money. So they had me come in and tell them how it was supposed to run and stuff. So I still worked. I worked for them doing that for a couple more years because it was, like I said, it was good money and you were paid commission. A friend and I decided we would start our own remodeling. Well, we were just going to do painting because she knew some guy that had all these apartments and he was going to hire us to paint them all in the winter, so we knew we were covered for a couple months, and we just decided to do it. So I think that was the early 80s. We started doing that, and that actually became quite interesting because we never really advertised or anything. It was just all word of mouth, and we got to meet a lot of older lesbians who would find out about us through, the good old network of gossiping, and we would meet these women who you never, ever saw anywhere. They never went to the bars, they never came to the concerts. They had their own little house party, so we would be at a house working for someone, and mid-afternoon, all of a sudden, here'd be, 5 or 6 or 10 women showing up at the door with their bottle of alcohol or some cookies, and they would sit around. And of course, they wanted to meet us because we were the young lesbians who were doing what they, of course, all knew how to do and had done for years. And, but that was really interesting to meet some of them, and I'm sure most of them have passed by now because that was 30 years ago. But
now, were these single, unmarried women that were living by themselves or in relationships?
Yeah.
Or
most, from what I recall, most of them were either single or they were in couples, and they were friends, so they would get together, and if one of them was single, they were always trying to find a partner for the single one. But they just had their, parties, or they golfed. A lot of them golfed together, certain groups. But yeah, you would never see them at any of the bars. They were too afraid, or this wasn't something that they thought was right. Although, they would drink more than you ever saw anyone drink in a bar. They did it at each other's homes.
Do you ever recall back in the earlier days any gay rallies or protests or marches or anything like that?
Yes, there were. I'm really bad with years. I remember going to Washington 3 times, 2 for anti-war protest things and 1 for a gay rights march. I don't think it was a women's march. I think it was a gay rights march, but I have no idea what year it was. Would have been in the 70s.
Was there any of that activity taking place here in Columbus at that time?
There were, no, because it was more of there was a lot of anti-war rallies and marches and protests going on. I don't really recall there being gay ones. And I know on the Oval we would have some rallies that, were on a smaller scale.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, the gay groups would have a rally on the Oval. And then there was always...
Just as like a social event, or...?
No, they would have speakers and stuff. And there was always either a Women's Week or a Gay Awareness Week or something. There's always something like that every year where there was speakers or films or performers or rallies and things going on.
Who were the people that were organizing those sorts of things?
Well, there was a women's studies group on campus. There was a women's, there was another women's group, and then the gay student, that was an official university group. That was separate from the student organizations. The student organizations had the gay group and the women's liberation group and all those. The women's liberation, and then there was another one too, women's student activities or something like that. And they partly community oriented too, and they would co-sponsor a lot of events we did. I know when the Women's Music Union existed, they would help us co-sponsor events, and we would have them on campus. But there were lesbian professors at Ohio State, and in the early days they were not out. They were totally afraid that some of their students might see them. I can remember one in particular coming to Jack's one time and just being terrified that a student would see her there. But then later, there were ones who came out, and Vera and Lila Brout were out and did a lot of gay and women's history and social. Actually, they've written a lot of books, did a lot of stuff. They've since moved on somewhere else.
So what drove you to get so involved with these different organizations and political groups? Where did your motivation to do that come from?
It just became a passion, and it just seemed like what I heard and what people were saying with different things just seemed to be true and felt right, and I couldn't believe that other people thought otherwise about them. And I think the war was the first one, and then just, the whole women's movement, and just realizing that, and the gay movement. And it took me a while to find out what I was good at that could make a difference. Like I said, we started all these groups, and I think finally with the Women's Music Union, I realized that that's really where my passion lied, and where I felt like I was good at doing something. So I know when Carla and Linda begged me to come stage manage for the Pride Festival, I was like, oh, all right. And then kind of have been there ever since. But I guess I feel like it's something that I can do that I know I'm good at, and I feel like it does make a difference. I think music has played a big part in social change and activism throughout the years. And it certainly was with the women's movement, and that evolved on a purely independent basis, that these performers started touring and would teach women how to be a production company and produce them, and find a church, find a school, find an empty building, or somewhere where you can have this. They would put out booklets of here's how to do it. Olivia Records started, a couple of women's distribution companies started. So it all grew into this huge thing where, some of these performers were drawing, 500, 700 people. There were 2 shows that Olivia did at Carnegie Hall for their 15th and 25th anniversary, I believe. And at the time, they were 2 of the highest grossing shows that were ever at Carnegie Hall. So women were starving for entertainment, but entertainment that meant something. And then I think, it's evolved, and then it became, oh, they're boring, they're doing the same old thing, and something new. And, now there's just such an array of, I think it skipped a generation, the women and gay performers that were traveling and doing that, and then now there's a whole batch of younger ones who are out there doing the same thing they did in the 70s, who are on the road all the time, who are very political, very spiritual, very out there doing their entertaining, but being very political about what they say and what they're trying to get across and what they're fighting for. Say like Alex Olsen and Amber Swift and Melissa Ferrick and Bitch and Animal. There's a lot of them now, and there wasn't for a long time. There was like this big gap of not much going on. So it's kind of refreshing to see, and they say everything comes around, every 30 years, and it's kind of, it was true, because I see a lot of the same things going on, only now these younger performers have the internet and email and, instead of back then where you got on the phone and you knew you were going to be on the phone all afternoon calling everybody, and you hoped you got their answering machine so you could just leave a message instead of having to talk to them. But that was how, you got the word out about an event that was coming up. Now, they all have email lists, they have websites. It's a piece of cake to build up your fan base now.
You had mentioned earlier in our discussion about the war protests at Ohio State and about the riot. Were you present on campus when all that was going on?
Oh, yes.
Well, tell me a little bit about what that was like.
I remember the night they came storming down. I actually had an apartment on 13th and High, and you would be at this rally, and the police would come and start dispersing it, and they would shoot tear gas at you, and they would shoot these wooden pellets at you, and it just created all this chaos, and everyone would start running, and they would start running after you, and they would be swinging their clubs, and you hoped you could run faster than them, otherwise you were going to get smacked in the head. And I can remember the one night I think it was the night they called the National Guard in. They were running up and down the high street, and we literally, when we would see some student or protester out on the street, yell at them to come up to our apartment for safety because they were just coming, marching down the streets, grabbing anyone, shooting pellets at them. I mean, they were sit over at the Ohio Union on the steps and shooting their pellets and tear gas at people, and they would walk by.
Was this just like a regular occurrence, or?
It happened a lot for several months. The big one when the 4 students were shot at Kent State, and then that triggered, people really being upset. And then I think that was shortly after that when they called the National Guard in here to quiet things down. To me, it was a period where you could walk down the street and just by how somebody was dressed or if they had long hair, you kind of just immediately had this camaraderie and people really felt like they could change the world then, and they wanted a better world, and they wanted, these things to happen. It was very idealistic in a lot of ways, but it was a really cool feeling to feel that and to know just by seeing people on the street, and there was no fear to hanging out with people you didn't know because you knew they were okay.
What happened when the National Guard, what happened on campus after the Kent State shootings that brought in the National Guard?
I believe it was a rally that got too big, and the thing back then, there was a lot of, the protesters were so passionate about what they believed, and the police came in and they were totally unequipped to handle something like that, and I'm sure they were scared and didn't know, and here, they had their guns, so it was a very intimidating on both ends. So, it didn't take anything of, a student yelling something or calling them, pigs or whatever to piss off the police, and then it was just like whatever. Then they'd start charging, and I can say now it wasn't always the police who were in the wrong. I think they were very scared too and had no idea how to deal with that kind of situation. So it didn't take anything to set the two groups off. It was this confrontation. They were the bad guy. It was a very black and white situation because they had the guns, they had the power, and the people had the masses and the numbers.
Did you ever get assaulted or arrested or anything in any of those protests?
I did not. I managed to
outrun them?
But I remember looking behind my shoulder, seeing them coming, swinging those clubs.
Did you have any friends that got struck or arrested?
Yeah.
What would happen when somebody was arrested? Would they just...
They would go to jail and spend the night, and then they would let them out because they really didn't have anything to charge them with, disrupting or whatever. There were no charges that really put them in jail unless they found pot or something like that on them. A lot of the people that were the official members of the Indochina Peace campaign who put their names on paper were always getting harassed and their phones tapped. It was scary, but it was exciting, and because of the passion and the beliefs and the strengths.
As long as we're talking about police, I wanted to ask you, other people have told me about conflicts or issues that they either personally experienced with the police as a gay person or they heard about other people experiencing. Have you ever had any problems or issues with the police or seen where police were going into gay bars or doing anything that was what you thought would be inappropriate?
Not really, because even back then when the gay movement started, it was like lesbians were kind of invisible to the mainstream world. It was the gay men that they were out to beat up and harass, and the women were still, they didn't even think that we existed. And if they did, then that was their biggest fantasy, to have two lesbians. Anyway, so it was a whole different kind of thing for a long time, which is why we did a lot of stuff like walking down the street holding hands because it was like, hey, we are here too, But no, I don't recall the police really ever coming into Jack's back then and doing anything. The fights that occurred, people kind of took care of things themselves. And
You talked before about how men and women gay men and women kind of lived separately. They didn't mingle a lot together. Did gay people of different races hang out together, or were people welcome in bars regardless of what their race was, or were there any issues you recall about that?
At Jack's, they didn't care. I mean, there were 15, 16-year-olds in there too. They didn't care about that. I think one of the things the women's movement, the lesbian movement always tried to do was to be inclusive and try to get women of color involved and together. But there really wasn't a lot of overlap. I think, everybody just kind of stayed in their own groups for the most part. I mean, there was some mingling and hanging out and some, overlap. But I don't think in the beginning there was a whole lot. I think people were too involved in their own personal whatever that was their passion and their biggest thing to them, and kind of formed all these little cliques and groups and stuff. And even, the gay men, I think, were seen as men by a lot of the lesbians, whether they knew them or not. It's like, oh, they're oppressing us too, just because they're men. And there again, even at the dance bars, when they would be together, there was not much interaction because they were just dancing and partying. So I think that really did take, a long time and finally evolved where, when they did talk, they did realize, oh, we have a struggle together too. But I think, women had to find their own strength first and get their own power first, and then come back to the table and say, okay, we're equal now, let's work together on this gay thing, which we both are too. So I think we kind of had to deal with the women oppression and the gay oppression at the same time to get our strength before we could come back to the table as equals with gay men.
You talked a little bit before about the theory behind women-only events and why those were originally done and the purpose behind them and what you thought the benefit of them was. Can you explain to me just your understanding of the concept of all men as oppressors, or men in general as being oppressors? You mentioned a second ago. I just want to have an understanding of what that concept was.
Well, it was because of women being oppressed are only supposed to be doing certain things. They're supposed to be getting married, having children, the old barefoot and pregnant quote they used to say in the profession. So it was men were lumped as a group as an oppressor. Whereas individually, some were, some weren't, which is always the case. But on the whole, women were a lower class citizens. They weren't...
Just by virtue of their sex.
Yeah. They weren't given the same rights, the same powers, the same anything. So I think, that where, it wasn't an individual thing at all. It was more of, men are oppressive as a whole, as a group.
In the earlier days, do you recall any local publications for gay women?
Let's see. Yes, we had a few. I don't remember what we called them. There were 2 or 3 different magazines that were started. We actually had a women's writers conference at Camp Agape, which was owned by the United Methodist Church. They had a campsite near Newark that a lot of groups could use to have meetings or small, not really conventions, but we probably had 30 to 50 women that came to that and started a magazine that, I don't know how long it ran for, but there also was the Boston Women's Collective that put out a lot of literature and books and stuff were getting written back then. So there was the movement that way with the books and literature and the music, and it kind of all was happening at the same time.
When you were talking about, you said there were several local magazines. When you say magazine, what kind of a publication are you describing?
Well, not anything slick or whatever. It was maybe 10 to 20 page, on the size of a magazine, but done on paper, kind of like the Free Press was back then.
And what would be the content of?
It would be articles on things that related to women. Excuse me. As far as health, auto mechanic, any of those things, the rape issue, the women's rights, all this kind of thing.
You mentioned a little bit ago, but I wanted to ask you for a few more details. How was it that you first got involved with Stonewall Columbus and the Pride celebration?
Carla and Linda were friends of mine who had done a lot of theater and stuff, and they knew I had done music and stage managing and producing and all that stuff. And they said, we really need somebody to stage manage because nobody can get all these groups on and off and the flags and we need you. And I was like, all right. So I did, and then it kind of just evolved, and now I do the entertainment coordinator for them for the last 4 years, I guess. I find that exciting. I think, to me, I saw Carla and Linda get a lot of people to be coordinators of the different positions on the Pride Committee that actually knew how to do those positions. And I think that's a lot of why our Pride's one of the fastest growing Prides in the country, and one of the only ones that's grown by 20 to 25% every year for the last 6 years, I believe. 10 or 15,000 to over 100,000 now. So we're in the big leagues. But a lot of performers that come through and they say they've played at other Prides and stuff, and they really like ours. They like the energy. They like how they're treated. They like the people. So I think, we have a good reputation, and that's why a lot of, not only local, but a lot of people come from out of town to our Pride, even though it's the same weekend as New York and California and Toronto. We get a lot of out-of-town people here for ours because it's big, but yet you still have that community feeling.
Life today versus when you first came to Columbus, what are some of the big differences?
Oh, there's personally, or what I see happening?
Either way.
I've always seen Columbus as a place where it was easy to meet people in the gay community. The gay and artist community, I think, have always overlapped and coexisted very well in Columbus. And even though Columbus has grown by leaps and bounds, I still think it's a place to come that's very comfortable and easy to meet people, and we have 20-some gay bar and lesbian gay restaurants and clubs now that the larger cities don't have because they're so fragmented. They live in one part and won't go to another part of the city. And I see a lot more people being out, and not to be political or to say, hey, we're here, but just they are there. They're out and aren't afraid to hold hands or kiss each other.